us, Lakeisha Poole, Cynthia Overton, Amanda Gelender, and James Pratt. Would you all come join us? So welcome, everyone. Could I ask each of you to just introduce yourself and say just a few words about your story and what you do? We'll start with you, Amanda.
Sure. Hi, I'm Amanda Gelender, and I'm the founder and CEO of Medusa Global. And so a bit about my story. I was diagnosed with OCD and anxiety when I was really, really little. And then when I was in college, depression really hit me, and I ended up having a psychiatric ward, hospitalization, and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I was out of work for about 3 to 3.5 years, just trying to get through the day, trying to make sure I could feed myself and take a shower and do all that. When I came back into the workforce, I came into tech. And I had to navigate, how do I talk to my colleagues about this? How do I, if I come out, will that hurt my career, right? And as I started to weave through that, I came in contact with a lot of different modalities to support my own mental health and wellness, including things like cannabis and acupuncture. And I started to help workplaces, specifically tech workplaces, figure out how can we best support people with mental health challenges in the workplace. And so now, through my company, I do actually a combination of helping companies figure that out, as well as supporting people in the tech sector to come through Amsterdam, where I live, and have legal, transformational, psychedelic experiences to delve into their own trauma, as well as helping them figure out how can a psychedelic experience support me in figuring out the next wave of my business, or how I'm going to be a better leader in this company. So that's a bit about my work.
Thank you. Lakeisha.
Hi. So my name is Lakeisha Poole, and I'm the founder and CEO of Talent Karma. And Talent Karma's main focus is on toxic work environments. My background is as an employment lawyer, and I've experienced both from management side and from the employee side a lot of the issues that come when various types of behaviors are not addressed in the workplace. And I think that there's a more proactive way of dealing with that. So in addition to having Talent Karma, I've been leveraging the fact that I have a Black professionals group to do self-care workshops focusing on helping people identify the feelings that they have within so that they can better tap into ways to strategize to either leave the place they're working for, or negotiate better, or find a more value-aligned situation for themselves.
So hi, everybody.
Try again. Yeah, there we go.
Hey, everybody. My name is Cynthia.
Oh, wait. Can you all hear her?
Can you hear me?
No. Maybe we'll get you another mic, but in the meantime, go ahead and use that. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cynthia Overton. I work for a behavioral and social science research firm where I'm a principal research analyst. And I'm also founder of Inclusion Clearinghouse, which is an online platform that has resources to support diversity and inclusion, particularly in the tech industry. I came to that work in terms of the website really based on a lot of personal experiences that I've had really throughout my life, experiencing hostility, microaggressions in the workplace, and in other aspects of my life. And I really wanted to create resources to help address these issues within other settings. Since I've been doing this work, and I do it on my own, it's really been a very nice outlet for myself, I found. It's kind of helped with my own issues that I've been dealing with. But then I'm also very interested in this topic because mental health concerns run in my family. And it's just really kind of disheartening to see the stigma attached with mental illness and kind of where it can land you. I've, experienced, tragedy in terms of loss by suicide. I have a grandmother who had bipolar disorder and, have visited her in the psych ward. But bottom line is the issue is that these are things that nobody talked about in my family. And I believe that it was because of the stigma. So I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk about this openly in order to, to support us all.
Hopefully, is mic working? Good. My name is James Pratt. I'm the VP of People Development at Gravity Payments. I am the founder and host of the Silent Superheroes podcast, where we have frank conversations about mental health at work. So I talk with people who are out with their mental illness and the experience they've had at work with that. And like Amanda, I live with type 2 bipolar, something that I came to in 2012. I was in hospital for alcohol abuse. Did a great job of recovering from that, but something still wasn't right, and eventually was diagnosed with bipolar type 2 in 2014. And so I've been learning to live with and manage that condition, and hopefully we get a chance to talk about some of that today. Back to you.
Awesome. Thank you all for being really open about your past experiences. I think that's really important and a good model. One of the things that I have noticed in the tech industry, but just in general, is the stigma around talking about mental health, about talking about trauma, and really getting it out in the open, and allowing other people to even know that what you're going through, I think, is a big part of this too. And we can't support each other if we don't know anything about what we're going through. So I appreciate you all and coming on stage to talk about it, and all the work that you're doing. One of the things during the Me Too movement, with Me Too, and with all the stories that have come out, there's some really, really amazing things that have happened to really get those conversations out in the open, to get companies to start addressing that, and to start having some real accountability, and put people in jail that need to go in jail, and fire people that need to be fired, and at the same time, and also seeing just so many other people who have gone through what I have gone through is both, it's great to see that you're not alone, and also incredibly traumatic in a lot of ways, and it brings up a lot of the old stuff that you hide behind, and you just move forward. And so I have mild anxiety and depression as well, and all of that kind of comes out when so many stories come out, and when you're empathizing with other people as they tell their stories at the highest level of the Supreme Court, and all the way into the workplaces as well. So let's talk first, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think that we need to really address this individually and in the workplace. So my first question is, you all are working with different types of communities. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the communities you work with are going through, and how we can start to address them? Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So I have a Black professionals group. So I do some work with women and other groups, but most of my body of research is with Black professionals. And with the workshop that I did recently, I think it helped me tap into a lot of things that I had in my head and felt, but never really had a lot of language for. And I was doing a lot to help the community, the people that came to the workshop, better express their feelings, like the feelings of what surface acting is. And surface acting, if you guys don't know, it's like the behavior that one does at work, where you're kind of acting through, you're not really manifesting your true feelings. And if you are isolated in your workplace, you have a tendency to do that a lot more. And if you do that all the time, it causes a lot of stress and a lot of burden, more so because you have to return to your normal. It takes so much more time. It takes so much more energy out of your life. So we unpacked that, like, what are we doing in terms of surface acting and code switching at work, where you feel like there isn't an acceptance that's a baseline, and if I express an opinion about something, there's some ramifications, and all of the anxiety even in the thought of doing that. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that I can take as a tool to help companies. Like, you need to understand and empathize with a lot of this fear that is woven into the experience of being just other in your organization, so that you can think about this more constructively in terms of your policies. So I don't know if that answered that.
So, it's interesting because we're all, parts of different communities. I've got my work community, I've got my girlfriend community, and I also have a community of people who are not like me at all, people who have different political outlooks, people who look very different from me, and folks that I'm actually friends with. And it's really nice in terms of being able to have open and honest discussions. And that's one of the things that I try to do, particularly when it comes to young men of color. I can almost guarantee that anybody in this room who has a young man of color in their life has trained them on how to interact with the police. That's just something that we have to do in terms of being responsible. People don't understand that. People don't understand the importance and the fear and the trauma of whether or not you're going to be able to get out of a situation alive. And that's one of the things that I try to do, is have these open conversations with folks who've never even thought about that. I think that we spend so much time, though, thinking about how to stay safe, whether it's, African Americans in the police, or even women who are in situations where they are feeling threatened by men who can overpower them. We talk to folks about staying safe, but we don't really talk about the trauma that comes along with that. And so that's where I really think that, I have a lot of opportunity, and we have a lot of opportunity to make progress, to really kind of take things a step forward.
I think, so I organize a men's group, dads, to do something simple, which is go to the cinema. And we usually go out for a drink before or afterwards. And one of the things that we as men are taught not to do is talk about our feelings. And it is a taboo in many groups of men. And so through that forum, I try to encourage, more honest and open dialogue. And I think particularly now in the Me Too era, we as men need to reflect on how we've contributed to that. It occurred to me recently, I don't think many men necessarily understand what sexual assault is. And I think for some men, right now, that idea that, I have committed sexual assaults is a very difficult thing to come to terms with. The reason I think it's important that men learn to talk about their feelings and deal with those feelings of shame and guilt that might come up with something like that is that suicide is the leading cause of death in men under 45, and that's true both here in the US and in the UK. And I believe a big part of that is that, in communities of men, we don't tend to talk about our feelings and what's really bothering us. We hide behind this kind of, macho facade, but those are conversations we, as men, the men in the audience, need to have.
Amanda?
Yeah, there's so many different directions I feel like this question could go in, and I would love to kind of dig into what Lakeisha and Cynthia were saying as well about our tech workplaces. And I often find that, when managers and leaders can't even talk about things like race, how can we really expect that when a police shooting happens over the weekend and folks come through to work, that they can really even understand what that's like? And someone who does, I think, incredible work on this and inclusive culture is Nicole Sanchez, who's the CEO and founder of Via Consulting, and she wrote this piece called Business Leadership in Times of Violence. And she articulated the ways in which we need to even start with the lexicon and then move forward to understanding the types of trauma that communities are facing, because the separation between personal and work is completely blurred. And so I think our managers really need to start to understand, how can I best support the people on my teams based on all the events in the world and the types of things that they're experiencing.
And I think that we haven't touched too much on the LGBTQ community and the trauma within that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit too? within that community?
Sure. I mean, I'm openly queer, and I think one of the things that is really pressing for the queer community is violence against Black and brown trans women. I would say that's a really top concern, and I think that. Yeah, it's something that has deep impacts both personally in our communities as well as in our workplaces.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the stigma of mental health and how to get past it. So one of the things that I have noticed is that, and I think I was talking with both of you and both Suzanne and Amanda on the phone earlier this week about this, is that we don't talk about mental health very much. We have just started talking about self-care, and self-care is kind of the coded word, I think, for mental health and kind of the low bar, right? It's a low bar. Self-care, we should definitely be doing that, and there's a lot more that we could be doing. How do we get past the stigma of really talking about this and to doing something and to being there for each other, and getting to that point of healing and getting to that point of healing. Maybe I'll start with you, Suzanne, since you haven't, since we skipped you the last couple questions because I already asked some of you.
No, not at all. It's a tricky one, but I think it does start, as with a lot of things, awareness. And kind of a top-down model of being open and sharing. And I think just like what this panel has done and starting out, here are strangers that I haven't met before who are openly sharing about their mental health struggles. I don't know if you guys heard, but I was diagnosed with PTSD after the trauma with my family. It starts there, and just, erasing the stigma with recognizing our own personal struggles. The statistic in medical school is 40% of medical students are on antidepressants, which means 1 in 2 people I'm looking at are on an antidepressant. You don't get that vibe when you're in med school and everyone is, like cutthroat trying to make it to the top, residencies. So it starts by being able to talk about it openly. In residency, we had mental health days, which I don't know if they exist necessarily in the tech world, but with
sometimes.
all the, sometimes. But those were, being able to call it what it is. Like, I'm not physically sick today, but I'm emotionally not well, and I need to take a day off for my own sanity and well-being. But I find it also tricky because it is a conversation that is harder to have in places like in the communities that I work in. For example, a couple weeks ago, I had a patient come in who wanted a prescription for an anxiety medication for a flight she was taking and coming back, so just 2 pills of Klonopin. But as I dug deeper, trying to understand where this anxiety is coming from, it turns out that her daughter was physically assaulted, which resulted in a traumatic brain injury, which resulted in frontal lobe executive decision-making changes and personality changes, and she developed paranoia, felt like everyone was out to attack her. She ended up attacking her maternal grandmother and killing her, and ended up going to jail. So this patient of mine who's sitting there wanting a Klonopin for a flight had just lost her mother due to her daughter. I mean, how do you even get your mind around that? And how do I even talk to you about self-care when these people who are marginally housed don't even have a, if I were to tell you, go pull a bath tonight and listen to some music and read a good book, like that, those are issues that in places of privilege we can't always, the people who need it the most often are the ones who have a difficult time accessing them. But within areas within the tech sphere where this is something that we thrive on, and being able to provide resources, this is something that I think we can totally capitalize on and prioritize for folks.
You mentioned the culture in med school of kind of everybody competing, and I think in tech we have that same issue where, if you look at the lexicon of many tech companies, it's like, I'm killing it, I'm crushing it, right? And you're very much in a position, excuse me, of power and control. Like, I'm powerful, like I'm in control of everything. And I think what's so hard with mental illness for so many people is that idea that this thing that originates kind of my personality and everything that I am, I may not be completely in control. of that thing. And I think that's one of the hardest things for people to overcome. And I don't know, Amanda, what your experience of that through your kind of diagnosis is, but what have you learned about?
Well, for me, I have a bit of an alternative take on my diagnosis. I actually identify as neurodivergent, and for me, what that is it's recasting a label that was sort of put on me as a pathology, and accepting that part of what makes me able to do the work that I do is that I have these mental health challenges, right? So if we take bipolar, for instance, I can access a wide range of the human spectrum, right? And so there are these sort of highs and lows that can be dangerous, but also that's where I think a lot of us get our brilliance from, our creativity from. And so I want to hold space for the whole spectrum of what mental health challenges bring us. And there's a framework from the Icarus Project that I love called Dangerous Gifts, that if we receive the type of care that we need, the community support that we need, we can understand that there is giftedness in neurodivergence and being able to really just hold space for the entire experience.
I was going to say, one of the reasons I created Talent Karma was because I felt as an employment lawyer, I was like this hidden, repository of hidden trauma, basically, because, of course, you're obligated not to disclose, and there's a lot of framing of issues of trauma in the framework of whether I should take this case management, let's see what the value of the case is, which is, not the most empathetic place to be in. And I think what I've learned both from my experience with doing events for Black professionals and for women is that there's a lot of sense that, that there's an experience of this trauma and this emotional experience and this mental health decline that, part of the decline is and to me, it's also a part where people, they're hiding within themselves these feelings and telling themselves a story that I can't, or maybe they have some legitimate reason to feel like I cannot disclose this. I should tolerate the situation because, look, they've endured this. I mean, I know even, in my experience, if there was anything that happened, I should take it as a compliment and not see it as, I shouldn't rail against everything that's happened. And so, I think that it's relating to, in my mind, professional self-care is different from baths and the self-care of it's also about giving agency within the context of employment so that people are more empowered. They're in an empowered frame, so they're not just staying in the situation, which touches upon their overall ability to navigate and away from being in a state where their health is declining. Mm.
So, when we think about this in the workplace, I think that we really need for our mid-managers to step up. Mid-managers set the culture, and we need workplace cultures that are safe, that are inclusive, and that are conducive to people actually addressing these issues. Just because a manager has not set a culture that is supportive does not mean that these concerns are not present. And just think about how much more productive a workplace environment could be if we were in safe spaces and could talk about these issues. And another thing that it takes, I have to say, is bravery. I'm so struck when I see somebody write an article about how they have experienced mental health or mental illness, mental health concerns, and we often see so many people responding in support. And I think that people are hungry for role models. So, I think that it's really going to take more people stepping up saying, hey, this is something that I experienced and this is how I've dealt with it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Cynthia. This is the first time I've ever publicly said that I had anxiety and depression, and I think that it's much easier to hide it in a lot of ways. discomfort you don't go through, and a judgment, honestly, and that fear of judgment, I think, is the big one. But the more that we all talk about it, the more it's normalized, that it's out there, that we are, this is me, and this is you, and this is you, and the more it becomes a strength, right? That experience that I have can become a strength in the workplace. We can flip it to so that I am neurodivergent, you're neurodivergent, and we have more to add as a result of that.
Melinda, so we're at a really interesting moment right now, right? You have just said in public, in front of a group of strangers for the first time, I've struggled with anxiety and depression. How do you feel right in this moment, having said that?
Yeah, I've said so many things, but I think the time is now. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the time is now. It is getting safer to say those things, and I'm also, quite frankly, I'm in a privileged position where I run my own company, and I work with Backstage Capital, which is a great company to work with as well. So I'm in a privileged position of being able to fairly easily say that in public, and others are not, and so I do want to acknowledge that as well. But I do think it's really important. I think it's really important that we all acknowledge who we are fully and completely, and bring that to the workplace, bring that to our families, bring that to society. And the more that we do that, the better we will all be, and the more we will be able to be there for each other and really understand each other and what each other is going through. Yeah. So speaking of that, in the workplace, how do we get to a point where it is a safe space? I know that Lakeisha and James, and actually all of you in some ways, are working on just this, on creating safe spaces for people to explore this, explore themselves, and explore how to build companies that are open and have safe spaces. Can you talk a little bit about that, any of you? But I know that the two of you in particular, it's right there.
Yeah. I love, that's what I love to talk about. Like, how can we change all this toxic work environments?
Exactly.
Yes, toxic work environments bad. We know that. I love to start with companies that are not huge, they're at that stage where they're large, maybe, that they're not so big that it's going to take a lot more work. But I think that the most important thing is not just to get support from leadership, but really get engagement from leadership, as in, I need you to unpack your stuff so that you can be more empathetic in everything that you see in the organization, and have that framing for what creates the policy change. And then once you go there, it depends on what the company has had. We do an assessment, and then there could be multiple things. But, a lot of what I like the most is the stuff that's working around giving more agency to employees. So, imagine, one of the frustrations I've had as an employment lawyer is I always hated giving harassment training, because harassment training almost gets people more entrenched in being biased, in my opinion, for so many reasons. So instead of that, I guess in addition to that, is something that's just more designed to engage in empathy.
I would add, you mentioned leadership, and I think it's very powerful when someone in a position of leadership, a position of privilege, can say, hey, I have dealt with anxiety or depression or bipolar or psychosis or whatever that might be, because I do think culture flows down often, and I do think that creates the space and the opportunity for that conversation to happen. I think, Cynthia, your point about those people in management, and I would argue mid-manager or even frontline managers, can create a culture, at least within their team, again, because they have a position of influence and privilege, to be able to have that conversation. I'd be curious to see a show of hands. Who here is in a position of management? You manage other people. Okay, so maybe a quarter of the people here. I would ask each of you to go and educate yourselves and learn more about mental health and mental illness. I found a website yesterday called findyourwords.org. It's by Kaiser Permanente, and it has resources to help you have a conversation about mental health and mental illness, because I don't think many people know. Like, if you're worried about somebody's mental health, what do you say? And that website has some great resources. Third place I would go is, I think if you work in the HR profession, as we were talking about before, those of us who work in HR, we have a pretty bad reputation. We are not a safe space, most people think. If you work in HR, think about the resources that you can bring to bear to create that safe space, whether it might be on-site counseling or therapy, or simply educating yourself and letting it be known, hey, I'm trying to learn more about this topic. So I think those, for me, are 3 ways that we can begin to address this.
Yeah, I agree that we need more self-reflective leaders. And as someone who supports tech leaders through psychedelic experiences, what I often see is that sort of in that sort of truncated period of time where we do sort of 6 hours together and so much kind of comes up, but it's this complete shifting of how you think. It's an analysis of their own trauma, of things that have happened in their lives, what led them to where they are today, and how can they move forward as a more empathetic and responsible leader in their companies. So I see that, when folks come through, and I think that, I'm not saying psychedelics are the only ways, no. I'm saying that's a modality that I work with, but whatever leaders need to do to get into a space where they can really understand themselves better and be more self-reflective, that is going to create the sort of cultures that we need in which people can really feel included and do the best work of their lives.
So we're almost out of time, and I want to just ask each of you if there's anything else that you want to make sure that is heard by the audience on this subject. So we'll start with you, Suzanne. You haven't said much. Ooh. Oh, and if not, if you don't have anything yet, we can.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to jump in, but anything else? I feel like I've been given the mic, so I'm, if anything, wanting to diffuse the time. Echoing, I think, your point about self-awareness, the thing that I've learned a lot through trying to understand why anyone would murder my baby brother, really, as the core of why would this happen? He's a wonderful person. He's never, he was professionally bright. He was community service oriented. He didn't drink or party, like, the ideal college kid. And trying to really understand that core and coming to a realization that there are implicit biases that we all carry. I carry them, you carry them, we all carry them. I would encourage you to maybe take them. The Harvard implicit bias test, you can just Google it. You can incorporate it at work where you have a session where you have people take them and talk about how they feel about it if they want to open up. It's remarkable to hear, I have friends who are feminists for generations, and she's taken the implicit bias test about gender roles in the workplace and has found that she biases towards believing that women belong in the home. And that's just a remarkable thing to even reflect internally, with all the media that we see, and I can't fault you for having implicit biases against Muslims, but the first step is to be aware of it, and then if you're more aware of it, you can be more cognizant on how to deal with it. And the same goes with, race, gender, sexuality, you name it. So that's kind of been the key point that I've tried to give to leaders in the workplace on, a little nugget you can take back.
So the one thing that I would say is that I really think it's important for people to acknowledge and address. So just to kind of give you a personal experience, I had spinal cord surgery a while back, had to go through a lot of physical issues. The way, though, I live in terms of my lifestyle, I live it in a way which accounts for my physical disability. I feel as though I'm better positioned for when I get older to age into disability, and I'm good. Well, when I was having my spinal cord surgery, I had a procedure that actually gave me amnesia. It was just like the soaps. So because of that, of course, I've had an experience in terms of what it's like for my mind not to work the way that I'm accustomed to. Well, I recently did 23andMe and found out that I am at a little greater risk for late-stage Alzheimer's. So one of the things that I'm thinking about now is thinking about what are some cognitive compensatory supports that I can think about now and just kind of have in my back pocket so that as I age, this is just something that'll be part of my life, I can draw on and just continue maximizing to the greatest extent possible. I can tell you, as I said, by observing firsthand with my family what it is like, and it is devastating to see mental illness go unaddressed. It only makes things more challenging when these issues are not acknowledged, discussed and dealt with. So I would just, again, really encourage folks to think about their own mental health, think about if there's a mental illness, and address it.
Oh, so I was going to say I do have a real fascination with toxic work environments, and I have this glossary actually of different terms that I think are useful to kind of help people better communicate what issues are they're experiencing. So I can definitely share that if you guys send me. I can reach out and I will send it to you gladly.
Awesome.
If I might, Amanda, after you.
Oh, well, I would say, for me, I recently read a book called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, and it's a book that I really highly recommend. And she's talking about how can we build better organizations, build better movements based on patterns in nature, based on how birds flock over distances, based on how mushroom networks grow underground. And the one thing that really stuck with me is she talked about how fractal patterns, the same on a small scale as they are on a large scale, are essential as we're thinking about building our movements, and how we treat each other interpersonally is the type of world and business that we're building. And so I think that really sticks with me, because when we're talking about mental health and wellness, so much of this comes down to the interpersonal level. If you're the someone that a colleague feels comfortable reaching out to, saying, this is what I'm struggling with, there is so much power there in learning how to navigate that and hold space without judgment. And the same on a manager level or a leader level. And I think that increasingly we need to understand how the individual actions that we're taking are then escalating to larger scale movements. So.
Great.
So I will keep this very quick because I'm aware we're over time. We've talked about the stigma. And one of the ways that we address the stigma is to talk about mental illness. So I'm going to ask the audience a question because I think we don't realize how prevalent mental illness is. And when I ask this question, recognize you cannot raise your hand, but I'd be curious to hear how many people in this audience are managing or have managed a mental illness of some sort. Okay. This here is the point that I would guess about half the hands in this room went up. So when each of you are ready, when you're ready, tell your story to your colleagues and your friends, because you will make it okay for other people to tell their stories. And when we all start to tell our stories, the stigma goes away and people can get the help that they need.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to do one thing here just really quickly. If everybody could, for a moment, just sit here and close your eyes if you want, just for a few seconds, and think about what you want to take away from this conversation. We went through some really hard topics here. Just sit for a moment and think about what you want to take away from this. Okay. Keep thinking about that. And if you're comfortable as we break here, if you want to just take a moment and talk with your neighbor about it. I know there are some extroverts in the audience that like to talk things through. I am not one, so I am to sit with it and then kind of think about it for a while. But if you are an extrovert, feel free in this space, be safe with each other. And thank you for being fully present, and thank you all for talking about all of this and for doing the work that you do.